Today we're going to do a comparison between rolling out Zscaler private access for work from home in comparison to using SD-WAN and extending your company SSID into the home network. My name is Stuart Hardy and I work for Accelerate Networks, a proud partner for Zscaler in Africa. Our agenda is to do a financial comparison. We're going to then look at the SD-WAN architecture for work from home, compare it to Zscaler private access and include Zscaler internet access. We're going to do a feature and service comparison, and then we're going to talk about some of the TCO considerations when changing your infrastructure to a Zscaler-centric type of environment, as well as comparing the outcomes of this investigation to what Gartner advocate in their Secure Access Service Edge framework. So as a starting point, the price difference between using SD-WAN and Zscaler private access, and in this case we're using ZPA Business, is considerable. On the SD-WAN side, you're looking at roughly 600 Rand per user per month on average, and that's between 3 or 4 primary SD-WAN vendors. And at a 3-year total cost of ownership level for 1,000 users, you're looking at roughly 21 million Rand. In the Zscaler environment, which includes unlimited application segmentation, which is the ZPA Business Suite, you're looking at around 120 Rand per user per month at 1,000 users, and a 3-year cost of 4,320,000 Rand. And ultimately, these services are meant to do the same thing. Both are meant to connect you to your business applications. What I've also done is I've added in, because of the massive gap, I've added in Zscaler internet access, which is allowing companies to understand what it means to transform their security into the cloud as well. And that adds an additional 110 Rand per user per month and takes the total cost for Zscaler to 8,820,000 Rand. So the burning question when you look at these numbers is, does SD-WAN justify up to 6 times price difference when compared to services like Zscaler's private access? And that's what we're going to determine within this presentation. So we're going to use a typical network architecture to identify the difference between these two services. And this could be an MPLS network or an SD-WAN network, but essentially it's characterized by the fact that still today for most organizations, their security and policies sit in the data center, and they are typically still sitting on appliances, and they control all the inbound and outbound traffic to the internet. So to extend the company network and SSID to the home user, you can put down an SD-WAN appliance. That SD-WAN appliance would be responsible for building a VPN tunnel, terminating onto some type of SD-WAN concentrator, and then giving you access to the network. And the intention of this is very simple. Companies want to get users back onto the network because that's where their security and their policies sit. So pretty simple, makes sense. The only problem with that today is, of course, we know users not sitting on the network, and increasingly applications are moving into cloud. So by forcing the user back to the network, you are in fact adding additional latency, you're adding complexity, and you're adding cost. But the most important thing you're doing is you're taking away from the user experience. So one of the main questions I ask at this stage is, if you're transforming applications into cloud, are you getting the performance benefits that you expect without transforming both your network and security to align with cloud application delivery and to align with direct to cloud? So this architecture doesn't speak to that. This architecture just recognizes what we've been doing for the last 30 years and tries to once again push users back to the same network that we built without cloud in mind in the first place. This problem becomes a little bit worse when you start considering the fact that whilst you're extending the network to the home user, you're still not protecting the endpoint. And even if you can do split tunneling from the SD-WAN appliance, anything that goes directly to the internet is largely unsecure and exposes the user to, and eventually the corporate network, to internet-related threats, malware, ransomware, etc. So, why do companies consider extending their network? Well, I guess it's because it's the simplest in their minds, and because they haven't really figured out a way how to transform their security or how to decentralize it. So trying to get this kind of security stack available to the end user is very difficult if you're still thinking about appliances and if you're not taking a cloud-based approach. So what does this achieve at an SD-WAN level? Well, first and foremost, it connects you back to the network. Right? So you're on the network and everything applies as if you were inside the office. One of the other things I like about it, though, is that some of the SD-WAN vendors are able to add an optimization. And what that means is between the endpoint device and the network, you could do some type of packet optimization using caching or compression or forward error correction. And that can enhance some poor internet infrastructure, especially when it comes to latency sensitive applications like voice. So aside from that, the question is this a logical cloud-first strategy? And the answer is no. Cloud providers advocate that the best route to cloud applications is direct. And more importantly, if you start passing application access through optimized links, you actually lose a lot of the support that you get in cloud. So if Microsoft needs to support you as an end user or your company, as soon as they find out you're doing optimization, they won't support you, because best practice is to not optimize services and rather just to go direct to internet. So what are the downsides? It's very expensive to do this. As we've seen from the quick view of the financial summary, you're looking at 600 Rand plus per site. And that has a lot to do with the fact that you're deploying physical hardware, you've got licenses, and you've got management of those environments. And the complexity is that you're essentially now extending your network to 1,000 home locations, and that is unnecessary complex in our minds. You're obviously not improving application performance because you're forcing additional latency, and you're also forcing users to travel through a lot of devices that are bottlenecks in this design. So if the user somehow gets access to 5G, the reality is that 5G won't matter because he can't go direct to cloud. He's going to go through an appliance, and that appliance is going to be typically a 20, a 50, 100 meg appliance and will act as the bottleneck. And if it doesn't act as a bottleneck here, it will act as a bottleneck here. So because of all that complexity, because of all these appliances, because of all these bottlenecks, it's going to have a high IT overhead. And of course, it doesn't reduce mobility. So as soon as the user leaves this network, leaves his home and goes to a hotspot or travels, you have to look at additional technology to try and secure the actual endpoint. And this picture over here represents the endpoint. So what does this look like in a Zscaler world? Well, if we're talking about work from home, then everything that you deliver to a work from home user by dragging them back to the network using SD-WAN would disappear in a Zscaler world. So if you're relying on any of these technologies in your network for work from home, you can in fact remove them all and uplift those security controls and processes into cloud. So they still exist, but they exist in cloud, just the same way as your SAP server now exists in AWS, as an example. So there are three components to the Zscaler environment. The first one is what we call the client connector. It's essentially a lightweight application that sits in the background of the machine, but it sits on the endpoint, and it's responsible for connecting and routing all traffic to Zscaler that leaves the endpoint. So that's the one thing. The second is, of course, this cloud native policy broker where everything connects to. And what that does is it gives you, on the one side, a view of the user's device, the user themselves and the applications they're connecting to. And on the other side, it securely connects them to the internet by applying your security policies and scanning all traffic in and out of the network. So things like SSL inspection and DLP will actually now happen in cloud. This third part is what we call the application connectors. So those you can spin up on the App Store in Azure and AWS, or you can spin them up on a virtual machine inside your data center. And what they do is they sit on the same subnet as your applications and expose those applications to the Zscaler private access environment. And they do that by building outbound TLS tunnels. So from your cloud, from your data center, and because it's an outbound single TLS tunnel, there's no publishing and IP addresses, there's no attack surface, your applications are essentially dark, and it certainly does simplify your firewall policies because all you need to do is allow an outbound rule for a specific IP address or a range of IP addresses to hit the Zscaler environment. So once that's done, the next thing you do is you connect to your applications. So the principle of the experience around this from a user point of view is that it mimics the same experience that you have when you walk into your company and connect to the wireless or connect to your Ethernet. Is that you open your laptop and it automatically registers you onto the network, it automatically authenticates against your IDP, and it's live on the network. There's no manual click of a VPN client, there's no cumbersome authentication process. It actually happens transparently. And once it's done that, the only thing left for the user to do is actually request an application. When that application request is made, the request will hit the policy broker for Zscaler. It will determine based on policy whether that user has the right to that application. And if it does, it'll stitch that application connection together to the closest point that that application exists in the network. So we've moved away from a concept like SD-WAN of extending the network and connecting users to the network to never connecting a user to the network, rather connecting the user to Zscaler and only based on policy connecting them then to applications. And those applications can sit in the DC as they are here, or those applications can sit in direct to cloud. And by being direct to cloud, you also increase the performance and you remove all of those bottlenecks that we looked at around appliances in the SD-WAN scenario and appliances in the data center, which typically don't talk well to things like large last mile bandwidth or fiber. Where in this scenario, this software-based VPN will honor the last mile that you have. So it embraces the evolution of infrastructure all the way through to 5G. So let's talk about what you actually get in this environment, because this is the difference between the services. When we talked about the cost of ZPA, which is connecting users to applications based on policy, we compare that to SD-WAN extension. And in the ZPA environment, unlike in the SD-WAN environment, you get multi-factor authentication, so you can control the endpoint. It's a zero trust architecture, so by natively does application segmentation. So you can actually, using software, break up your applications into unlimited amounts of segments and then create policies that allows users to connect to specific applications or segments to ensure that you reduce the movement of users within your network. The policy broker is a single pane of glass that gives you complete visibility and control to such a degree that because you're seeing every application connection, you can actually discover all shadow IT, and more importantly, you can control shadow IT by limiting or removing access to those applications. It's a multi-cloud environment, so you can extend this network into AWS and Azure and Oracle and any other major cloud provider. And you go directly to cloud, which is a critical part of this when thinking about application performance. If you then add the ZIA side, which is cloud security, again, still the same endpoint agent now doing two things, you're then picking up things like advanced threat protection, SSL inspection, data loss prevention, advanced cloud sandbox, a layer 7 firewall, URL filtering, and a dedicated APN proxy, which obviously helps cost reduction. And that was the difference in price. That's literally, let's just say, another 110 Rand per user per month. So as a total bundle, you're looking at 230 Rand per user per month. But this is a radical difference between SD-WAN, which is only connecting you to your network, and Zscaler, which is completely transforming your security and your application access to a cloud native approach, allowing you to go direct to cloud and allowing you to remove a large amount of the complexity and disparate solutions and appliances that you had in the network to do all the things that we're seeing here today. So you can go through this in your own time. You can pause the video to have a look through this, but this is essentially the difference between what's included. And we started off with a financial comparison, comparing SD-WAN extension to Zscaler Private Access or Zscaler Private Access with Internet Access. But when you really consider the features and the capability inherent in these solutions, I don't really think it's a fair comparison. In the Zscaler world, you literally are able to do significantly more by controlling the user's endpoint, the user themselves, and the applications they access, and applying all the security that once sat in the enterprise environment in the cloud, where the SD-WAN environment literally is just getting you back to your network. So I think you have to put that into perspective. So when you start considering a up to 6 times price difference, it really becomes hard for me to kind of equate the value of that in the Zscaler context and in the mobility context. One thing that we haven't touched on, which again is a big difference, is when you start looking at transforming your network and you're using products that are cloud native like Zscaler, you actually can reduce other costs, which I haven't been brought into this exercise, like the licensing costs in the data center for security. You can retire your internet proxy, you can retire your VPN because Zero Trust is a VPN, it's not a VPN, it's a way of connecting to applications using Zero Trust. You can retire any application segmentation or micro-segmentation, either to reduce the movement on your network or to deal with third parties. And of course, you can retire any MFA third-party service that you have to control the endpoints. At a network level, you can reduce your cost of internet because you don't need as much in the DC. You can reduce your APN costs because you can forward all traffic from your APNs to Zscaler and get a dedicated APN proxy. You can reduce your IT overhead because you've now removed a lot of appliances, you've reduced a lot of technologies, you have a single pane of glass. It's much more simple, it's much more cost effective, and it has a lower IT overhead. And of course, this results in just better performance for the users, so you reduce your support tickets. So when you factor all those in, you start to get even a more interesting picture of doing a total cost of ownership between simply extending your network and moving into a zero trust cloud security world. So let's end with thinking about what Gartner SASE is. So Gartner came out with a framework in 2019, which basically said, in order to embrace cloud, companies have to shift application, access, and security away from the network and to the endpoint in a single vendor cloud native approach. And the reason they did this is because they, before COVID, are seeing increased mobility and application delivering from the cloud. So all these traditional architectures that we've had, that I've shown you in the first slide in this environment, don't actually align to what cloud transformation is today. If we had to take some of their thought process and now relate them back to what we've talked about, then this is the reality. Zscaler presents an opportunity to retire a wide range of disparate solutions in that single vendor approach that Gartner talk about, which reduces complexity, IT overhead. In the SD-WAN world, you're increasing your network footprint 1,000 times. You're putting down 1,000 appliances, 2,000 SSIDs. You're not reducing complexity, in my opinion, you're increasing complexity. Zscaler removes appliances and improves scalability by leveraging cloud architecture. SD-WAN is still locked to appliances and license restrictions for throughput. So if you do start adopting 5G, it's not going to help you when you have an appliance that can only give you throughput of 20 or 30 megs. So it's like building a 5-lane highway, but you're only allowed to use 1 lane. It doesn't really make much sense. Zscaler delivers a full security stack in the cloud, supporting better performance of cloud apps and security that follows the user. In the SD-WAN world, the only way it works is when the user's inside the home network or in the office. But that doesn't make sense if the user has to travel or wants to go down to a coffee shop, or if his internet access fails and he wants to tether to his mobile phone. Security needs to be established from the endpoint to truly provide seamless access from any location using any device from any network. And lastly, Zscaler TCO provides cost savings from licenses and service retirement to reduction of network costs and bandwidth in IT. And at the end of the day, that value, if you just compare it like for like, even though in the Zscaler world you've got maybe 10 or 15 different features and capabilities, the reality is Zscaler is 1/6 of the price of SD-WAN extension. So, there are cases where I can see SD-WAN being used where you need to optimize the last mile, but I think it's important for organizations to go through a proper due diligence in terms of features and in terms of cost, but more importantly, in terms of aligning with application transformation. And once you've done that, I think it's going to be very hard to justify spending 6 times more on what is a simple mechanism of extending your network so that you can try and maintain a legacy architecture that doesn't address cloud anymore. My name's Stuart Hardy. If you want to reach out to us for more information, please do so. My email address is stuart@an.co.za, and thank you for joining.